following will contain spoilers for Avatar: The Last Airbender. Sozins Comet is a testament to the growth of the characters up to this point, as each character is given a conflict that shows the ways they've changed throughout their journeys. Iroh's dream of conquering Ba Sing Se lost him his only son. It was after these events where he came to understand what he truly cared about. But even more than that, he came to understand the suffering he'd caused others. Unlike the other characters who have growing left to do, Iroh's journey of change is one that was completed before the events of the show. Instead, his character is one that fights to remain true to himself, atoning for his actions by preventing others from repeating his mistakes. His final battle at the end of the show being his ultimate form of atonement, taking back the city he once tried to conquer while bringing happiness to those who lived there through his humble life as a tea maker. Iroh was once someone who tried to seek glory through the fall of Ba Sing Se, but then he fought to take it back, seeking a life of humility. Sokka wanted to be a great warrior, like his father, but he had a major problem: his ego. Sokka tried to be everything he considered a man: stoic, strong, and brave. He saw himself as above his sister for her gender, and above Aang for his age. Suki would show Sokka his first failing. Despite his attempts to validate his superiority as a man, she embarrassed him. However, his desire to be a great warrior allowed him to put aside his pride and learn from her, teaching him that gender didn't matter when it came to being a great warrior. As pointed out by Kato, Jet would be the next to show Sokka his failings. Sokka saw himself as a leader, whose input was more valuable than his friends. But Jet's crew blindly following his orders allowed them to be manipulated, no one ever challenging Jet on his unhealthy leadership, even as his rage blinded him. Sokka moments before had his friends walking into a Fire Nation camp, but now he had learned to listen to their input, no longer viewing his friends as beneath him. Sokka tied his entire identity around the idea of being a man, but what did that even mean anymore? Being a man no longer meant that he was inherently a great warrior. With so many of his younger friends being born with incredible gifts, Sokka began to question what his strengths were, but his strength was something he hadn't considered one. Beating firebenders was fun. The idea that embodying childish expression could be a strength, a stark contrast to the stoic warrior Sokka wanted to present himself as. Sokka always had a goofy and creative mind. One way that Sokka showed his creative expression was in his art, something that was always met with the mockery of his friends, only reinforcing the idea that childish expression couldn't be a strength. But he was finally able to see it as one when he met Pian Dao. Pian Dao didn't belittle Sokka's creative expression as his friends before him had, giving Sokka the positive reinforcement he needed to wield his childish creativity as a strength. Sozins Comet put all of Sokka's growth to the test, as he fought alongside women, which he once considered as unfit to be warriors. Beating firebenders with fun as he gathered the ship's crew in one room for a birthday party. Sokka had become a great warrior, but not by becoming a man, but by becoming everything that made him Sokka. A childish creative leader who could beat firebenders with fun. Katara losing her mother defined so much of her life. As a weak child, there was nothing she could do, taking up responsibility to compensate for her weakness. But bubbling underneath all of this was a deep anger. Jet was the first person Katara saw her anger in. Just like her, he had lost his parents. But he allowed his anger to blind him and endangered the lives of innocent people. At Ba Sing Se, Jet's inability to let go of anger led to the loss of his life. Hama was the second person Katara saw her anger in. Hama was a waterbender from the South Pole, like Katara. On top of that, she was a fellow victim of the raids. But Hama's vengeance was so much more cruel than Jet's, as she sought to torture every Fire Nation civilian she met. When Katara bloodbended, she cried because she understood how having this ability could influence her actions, especially with her anger towards the Fire Nation. Someone from the Fire Nation that Katara held a particular anger towards was Zuko. At Ba Sing Se, she gave him a chance, yet he betrayed her. When he sought to join their group, she was the last to accept him, as it was hard for her to let her anger go. But at last, Zuko gave her anger direction. Confronting the man who took her mother, she saw the enemy's true face, a pathetic man who was hardly the intimidating warrior she saw as a child. When she was finally able to let that anger out, she chose mercy instead, a choice she made not out of pity or forgiveness, but to no longer let her anger control her. With hatred no longer clouding her judgment, she found it in herself to finally forgive Zuko. In her final battle against Azula, she fought alongside the one she once carried so much anger towards. Katara was once consumed by her hate towards those who took her mother away, but she found the strength to show mercy, and in the case of Zuko, to forgive. Zuko wanted so badly for his father to accept him. In his eyes, he was inadequate. His desperation for approval had him abandoning reason as he set out on a wild goose chase. Yet this angry, insecure person was not all Zuko was. In the back of his mind were the voices of his mother and uncle, guiding him to follow his morals and care for other people. But their voices were only two in a nation of people who fought in service of the war, including members of his family. With his father's actions forever scarring him and his sister casting a shadow that he could never escape. but the experiences of those he met began to create new voices in his mind. The voice of a woman hurt by the Fire Nation, the voice of a young boy, and the voice of a girl who lost her mother. When Zuko lost everything during the Siege of the North, it was hard for him to let his ambition go, that anything besides the future he sought could bring him happiness. But when faced with the opportunity to gain an edge on the Avatar, he couldn't do anything. Even with Appa there, he had no means to take what he wanted, no ship to take him home, and no manpower to support him. Zuko letting go of his ambition at Ba Sing Se is not because he realized what he was doing was wrong. It was because his ambitions were no longer possible. Which is why when Azula offered him the opportunity, he took it. With her, it was suddenly possible to take back his future. But when Zuko finally had what he wanted, his anger didn't go away. It only grew as the words of those he'd met continued to boil him. At the beach, he was finally able to recognize that the anger he felt was towards himself. That for the first time, he needed to look inwards. Learning the true history of his grandfathers changed something in Zuko. In understanding Sozin's cruelty, he saw what the Fire Nation represented. A man who wanted to control everything. Someone who manipulated others into thinking his actions were just. In Sozin, Zuko saw his father. But in Avatar Roku, whose compassion was so much like his mother's, he saw a new path. A chance to carry another's legacy. After confronting himself, he finally had the strength to confront his father, leaving him to do what he knew was right. After joining Team Avatar, Zuko was able to help them grow. Both Zuko and Aang saw firebending as a tool of destruction, both consumed by guilt by what their actions had done with fire. But they came to understand that that wasn't what fire was. Fire was the energy of life and of passion. If driven by goodwill, it could do incredible things. Sokka lost himself after the eclipse. He had finally understood what made him strong, but he doubted himself and sought a path of redemption. But Zuko had learned in his own path to redemption that what Sokka needed was to remain true to himself, something Zuko took all too long to realize. Katara was consumed by rage, a rage that made it hard for her to see reason, to see how her rage was destroying her, something Zuko was all too familiar with. But after giving her anger direction, she was finally able to see clearly. Zuko's journey is one of finding balance and emotional stability, learning to see different perspectives, contrasted in his fight against Azula, whose journey led her down a road of destructive insanity. For the first time, his fire was no longer fueled by anger, and when Azula sought to gain an edge, he protected Katara. Where he once only thought of himself and betrayed her, now he was capable of selflessness. Aang was the Avatar, and the world expected so much of him, but at his core, he was a 12-year-old boy. No child wants to bear responsibility if it means abandoning all that makes life enjoyable. Fun, his connection with others, and his ability to be himself. And while he had a right to all these things, he was still the Avatar. The world needed him. After waking up from the iceberg, he returned home, wanting to believe that place of comfort and familiarity was still there for him. But in returning, he was faced with the weight of his actions, his guilt deepening as he saw all that he failed to protect. But his friends reassured him that he still had a place in the world at their side. At this point, Aang understood the weight of his responsibility, but he was still a 12-year-old boy. Without a place of comfort to return to, he wanted to make sure his life was still fun. On Kyoshi Island, Aang was warned of the dangers of staying there, but all he wanted was the attention of those he could have fun with. In procrastinating in his responsibilities, innocent lives were put at risk, his experiences at Kyoshi teaching him the importance of finding balance in his wants and responsibilities. At the North Pole, Aang was given his first opportunity to redeem himself, protecting the Water Tribe where he'd failed to protect his people so long ago. But while Aang had learned to accept his responsibility as the Avatar, a new problem arose. Aang was still at heart an air nomad. As the last of his people, he felt a duty to carry their legacy. But the Avatar state was everything Aang didn't want to be, something he couldn't control, a powerful tool to be used against the Fire Nation. He wanted to save the world, but not at the cost of his humanity. But what if it was something he could control? Guru Patik helped Aang to confront every side of himself to control the Avatar state. But Aang didn't want to open his last chakra if it meant throwing away his connection with others. Iroh validated Aang's choice to keep his connections, instead of seeking ultimate power, a choice he went back on, and was punished for. For the second time, he failed the world, losing his ultimate power in the process. But hope came in the form of Zuko, who helped Aang to learn his last element. Even without the Avatar state, Aang was closer than ever before to being fully realized. He was an airbending master who carried the legacy of his people, a naturally gifted waterbender who'd changed so much, an earthbender who'd learned to face his problems, and a firebender who had learned not to be fueled by anger. But he needed to find a way to beat Ozai while staying true to himself, as he was punished already for going against who he was. But his friends, the avatars, and the world expected him to take a life. However, after receiving new guidance, he found his answer, a way to turn remaining true to himself into a source of strength. His final battle against Ozai was his ultimate test, a test of every element he'd learned to bend, and most importantly, a test to remain true to himself. Sparing Ozai twice in their fight until finally taking his bending away, Aang had remained true to himself in the way of the Air Nomads by sparing Ozai. Ozai was a man who believed mercy was weakness, and the Fire Nation were brainwashed into thinking the Air Nomads had armies. But Aang proved Ozai wrong while setting an example for the world of what a true Air Nomad was. Aang was once someone who ran from responsibility, but in accepting his burden, he found the strength to be what the world needed, finding balance between his responsibilities and desires for fun, connection, and being himself. He was the Avatar, but he was also Aang, the last Airbender. Sozins Comet highlights the core of so many of the characters' journeys, the importance to not sacrifice one's humanity in the face of tragedy and responsibility, to fight for what's right, to not be clouded by anger, to remain true to what makes you strong, and to find balance. A huge thank you to my coffee supporters, Kenny Ullisi and Alex Enterprises. Thank you for watching.